Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis here on the podcast feed. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. We're going to talk about Ohio State quarterbacks. I think this is always an interesting conversation, and I felt like for a while there, Bill, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, especially when it was in this rut, right? The Braxton Miller to JT Barrett to Dwayne Haskins to Justin Fields to CJ Stroud run. It was just like, man, Ohio State always has the best quarterback in the Big Ten. That's how it should be. Will it ever change? Man, oh man, this is just the way the world works. And that's what we want to talk about, because it's indisputable that it worked that way for a decade. But will it work that way in the future in the Big Ten, especially with the additions of Oregon and USC? And then what does that mean for Ohio State? I think from a prestige standpoint of we're the Big Ten quarterback factory, but more so from a winning standpoint when maybe you don't have the better quarterback in basically every conference game you play for a decade, which is a great place to start from a winning perspective. So that's why we're doing this. Is that a correct encapsulation of the point of this episode of Kings of Columbus?
Yeah, I think so. It was just sort of like taken for granted, I think, right? That Ohio State would, Saturday to Saturday, you could guarantee and feel really good about Ohio State always having the best quarterback on the field. And I think, like, by and large, moving forward, that will still probably be true. But I think with some of the additions the conference has made, and we'll talk about it, like it's not going to be as much of a given, and it'll just be, I don't know, a slightly new world for Ohio State, right? We're not saying like, Ohio State had a good run, but they're never going to have any good quarterbacks again, right? We're just saying that other teams in the Big Ten now might also have good quarterbacks, which is a different dynamic for Ohio State.
Is that what we are? It's like, Corey Dennis is gone. The era of Ohio State quarterbacks is dead. It was a good run while he was here. Sorry, guys. Corey took all the good quarterbacks to Tulsa. No, that's not the point. What we do, we need to revisit our past to understand our future. And one of the things at play here, Bill, I just did it this century, right? And centuries start with the 1, not the 0. So starting in 2001. Until now, how often has Ohio State had the best quarterback in the Big Ten? And I basically just went by who won the Big Ten quarterback of the year. Although I do want to have a discussion, because I actually do think there were coaches who were like, screw Ohio State for a section there that were like, we're not voting for their guy. We're not voting for their guy. We don't care. We're not voting for their guy. Because the point is this, it was not this way. It was not this way, because from 2001 until 2011, that's 11 years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Those 11 years, Bill, from 2001 to 2011, do you want to guess how many times Ohio State had the Big Ten quarterback of the year by the voting?
2?
1. And it was the year he won the Heisman.
Yeah.
It was like, I guess we have to make him the Big Ten quarterback of the year. He is the best player in college football for the team that was ranked number 1 through the entire regular season. I guess we'll pick him. Then from 2012 until 2023, those 12 years, do you want to guess how many times Ohio State had the Big Ten quarterback of the year by the voting?
9?
10. Every year except 2015, when they actually did have it. They just couldn't get out of their own way. They had maybe the 2 best quarterbacks. They couldn't figure out who to play, so the answer was nobody won. And then last year with Kyle McCord. So let's run through that recent history first. 2012, Braxton Miller. It's either him or Taylor Martinez. Braxton Miller and Taylor Martinez of Nebraska actually split the vote. Taylor Martinez was first for the coaches, second for the media. Braxton was first for the media, second for the coaches. Are you okay with me, in hindsight, declaring Braxton Miller the Big Ten quarterback of the year over Nebraska's Taylor Martinez?
I am okay with it. I'll allow that. Yeah.
You'll allow it? Thank you.
Yeah.
2013, Braxton Miller, Connor Cook of Michigan State was second team. You good? Braxton Miller. You remember Braxton Miller in 2013? Guy could play a little bit.
Yeah, he was pretty good that year.
Well, Penn State wiggle. You see that Penn State wiggle? Pretty good. Yeah. 2014, JT Barrett's the Big Ten quarterback of the year. Connor Cook is second. Again, Connor Cook, a mainstay, absolute mainstay. We're good with JT Barrett over Connor Cook, though, right? He wasn't a captain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
2015, it's Connor Cook. Connor Cook finally gets over the top, which is why he was like, give me that trophy from Archie Griffin. And he was like, I'm champ. Because he had been the number 2 quarterback in the Big Ten. I do kind of think the Big Ten should hand out a sword now instead of a trophy. Wouldn't you rather have a sword?
Yes, absolutely. It's also funny. So Connor Cook won it in 2015, despite not being the quarterback in Michigan State's biggest win of that season.
Yeah. The biggest win in Michigan State history.
Michigan State history.
Did not include the Big Ten quarterback of the year. CJ Beathard was number 2 in the voting that year from Iowa, who actually became like a longtime NFL quarterback. And Nate Sudfeld, also an NFL quarterback. Is he still a bird? Yeah. Is he still a bird?
He is not still a bird, but he was putting up numbers in that offense.
Yeah.
2014,
Indiana.
2015. Yeah, at Indiana.
He was number 3. So that's like Ohio State bungled JT Barrett and Cardale Jones so badly that the Big Ten quarterbacks that year in the voting were Connor Cook, CJ Beathard, and Nate Sudfeld. And then in 2016 and 17, JT Barrett won it again. So like you look at this, it's like, oh, JT Barrett was the Big Ten quarterback of the year in 14, 16, and 17. What happened in 15? Did he have a devastating injury? Was he abducted by aliens? It's like, no, they just didn't remember they should play him. They kind of forgot. See, this is why sometimes I think I'm too mean, but then sometimes I reevaluate my meanness and I'm like, no, I'm appropriately mean. What they did in 2015 at the quarterback position is unconscionable.
Yeah.
The bungling. Oh, the bungling. So it's
I'd read that book. You want to read a book called The Bungling?
The Bungling, the greatest coaching errors in modern college football history.
Actually, that might actually be a book. Write that down. Welcome to the bungling. It gets worse every day.
And that's one of those, there are the people where you ask them a question and you could put the word in their head and they'll put it back in the answer to you. Mm-hmm. We could find people who'd be like, oh yeah, that was a bungling. And we could be quoting people. It's a narrative podcast, The Bungling.
Yeah.
People love revisiting failure. Don't they? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If we were going to do a narrative podcast about great accomplishments or great failures, what would be more interesting?
Failures.
Okay. The Bungling. 2016 and 17 is JT Barrett. 2018 is Dwayne Haskins because he's Dwayne Haskins and he's better than everybody else. But Trace McSorley, shout out, finished second in the Big Ten quarterback of the year voting 3 straight years. 16, 17, 18. What does that tell you something positive? Good. This is kind of what I want to get at too in the course of this episode. Should a player like Trace McSorley be, and for that matter, should a player like JT Barrett, should they be the best and second best quarterbacks in the Big Ten on a yearly basis? That when you think of the example of what a Big Ten quarterback should be, are you thinking, yeah, man, we just need more JT Barretts and Trace McSorleys? And it might sound like I'm asking the question like sarcastically, but I'm actually asking the question because we know how the game has evolved. Mm-hmm. It also feels like it might be evolving back. And there are guys out there right now that, and this is the Kings of Columbus, but if you guys watch or listen to Kings of the North, if you told me that guys like Garrett Green and Avery Johnson were going to play like JT Barrett and Trace McSorley, I would be like, sign me up right now. Give me the JT Barrett version of those guys because there's a decent number of quarterbacks right now who really are more dangerous running than they are throwing, but they're not like reliable in either the way that JT Barrett and Trace McSorley were winning reliable players. So do you want more Barretts and McSorleys playing Big Ten quarterback?
Yeah, I think maybe that would be my preference as opposed to like guys like who?
Guys like Aiden O'Connell or Talia Tonga-Vailoa. Guys like, would you rather have good, winning, solid, run-heavy quarterbacks or guys who can chuck it around better with a higher ceiling maybe, but you're not quite as sure about them game to game?
That's a good question. I think
and within that, let me add this to the throwing quarterback. Also, then just like taking a shot on like young throwing quarterbacks who might develop into first round picks, but also might be complete busts, right? But the reason you recruited him is because the guy can chuck it around. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I think I would prefer the guy that has a little more mobility to him, a little more of a dual threat aspect. Because you don't need like an NFL caliber passer to win a national title. You don't need an NFL caliber passer in college football to be a good college football team, to have a good college football offense. It's great if you can have one, but I don't think you need one. So
didn't I think that 3 years ago?
Yeah, but I didn't agree with you. And it's not like, I'm not saying like CJ Stroud stinks, get rid of him. Like if you can get CJ Stroud, obviously get CJ Stroud. But like, there's a couple of those every 4 or 5 year kind of guys, right? I would much rather, I think Aiden O'Connell is like a good comparison, right? Like because Aiden O'Connell can throw it pretty well, but he's also basically unathletic as a quarterback. So I would very much rather have the Trace McSorley, JT Barrett types, even if the ceiling is lower as a passer. I think the playmaking, athleticism, running ability is my preference in college football. And it does feel like, to your point, it does feel like maybe there was a time where there was a very clear like delineation between like a quote unquote college quarterback and an NFL quarterback. And it seemed like college was like striving to find more of the NFL types. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just this particular crop of quarterbacks, but it does feel like there are more like college quarterback types, like prototypical college quarterback types in the sport, like making some waves now than maybe there were a couple of years ago.
I feel like the range was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That 5 year period. Trevor Lawrence, true freshman, wins the national title, and he can move, but he's a thrower. Joe Burrow, explosive season. Mac Jones wins it at Alabama. And we're also here seeing the evolution of the Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud quarterback. And then by the time you get to CJ Stroud, and I'm looking at Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, and Mac Jones, and I'm thinking CJ Stroud is the evolution of that type of quarterback. And it's exactly what Ohio State needs. And if you don't have that, I wouldn't want to try to compete for a national title without that. And then even as Georgia is winning with Stetson Bennett, who can move and is doing a decent number of things running the ball and is not a first round draft pick thrower at quarterback, I'm now viewing Stetson Bennett more as an outlier and thinking, I'd rather have a CJ Stroud, right? And again, nobody would say, I wish I would trade CJ Stroud for Stetson Bennett. But now maybe it's not that Stetson Bennett was an outlier, because when you look at how you try to win right now, like Will Howard and Dylan Gabriel chucks it and gets the ball out of his hands, but he can scoot a little bit. Are we not seeing a bunch of models? Quinn Ewers is more the drop back, right? Quinn Ewers is more Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, Mac Jones, Joe Burrow type, right? Is that fair?
I don't know. Well, like
move a little bit.
Yes. He's probably more that than he is like a Dylan Gabriel. But like if you watch a lot of what Quinn Ewers does, like it's a lot of quick game screen stuff. He's moving around. He's scrambling some. Like he actually might be more of the mold that you're talking about than people realize. Yeah, I just think because he was like the perfect quarterback prospect, that maybe people still view him as like a Trevor Lawrence type. I don't know that he's Trevor Lawrence. He might be more Dylan Gabriel than Trevor Lawrence. Okay. So I definitely thought we were in that period. So it's like you would. It's one of the things now. If you drop Trace McSorley or JT Barrett into let's say anybody other than Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten. If you gave JT Barrett or Trace McSorley to Penn State, and again, like Penn State's trying to evolve past Trace McSorley. Was that not the whole thing of like, we knew they can have a Trace McSorley. They're trying to get to the next thing. Yes, but now also they're asking Drew Aller to like run now this year, right? So like they were, and they were like, oh no, we don't like this. Let's go. We have a bigger Trace McSorley now.
Yeah. So if you could drop Barrett or McSorley into Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, Nebraska, right? These teams, not the elite of the elite in the Big Ten, but the teams with maybe playoff aspirations and good teams, they'd probably take them, right? and we'll have a Dylan Raiola conversation later, but like a lot of those.
Yeah. Maybe not
Iowa
Nebraska, but I think all the other ones. Yeah.
If Iowa had JT Barrett, would they be going to the playoff?
Yeah. You want to put JT Barrett and Caleb Johnson in the same backfield? Have at it. Yeah, I think it'd be okay. And JT, whatever you think of JT's limitations as a passer, he's a better passer than Cade McNamara.
That's one of those things. By the end, Ohio State fans, it is the most complicated legacy I think that I've covered at Ohio State. He's the greatest. He's simultaneously the greatest quarterback in Ohio State history. And if he could have come back for a 7th year or whatever, people would have been like, no, please, somebody else. But if you drop JT Barrett on Iowa tomorrow, I think Iowa's like in the semis. Is Iowa the 4th best team in the country if their quarterback is JT Barrett? Like a winning, tough, smart, run threat paired with a Heisman candidate running back who can also make throws when needed, backed by that defense and an offensive line that's playing pretty well. I'm not even we might be underselling Hawkeye JT Barrett.
Yeah. Plus, you have on tape how good JT is throwing the ball to Iowa players, so that's encouraging too.
It's you. You got to do that.
That was a layup. That was a layup.
But that's the dichotomy of JT Barrett. We're like, it's like, hey, wouldn't you love to have him? He would bring you to the college football playoff semifinals, but also let's mock him for that time he threw 3 picks. Yeah. Oh, it's the JT Barrett experience. Justin Fields, Big Ten quarterback of the year in 2019. Tanner Morgan was 2nd that year. And again, like there's a couple guys in here who are like the encapsulation of what you kind of, it's the facade of Big Ten quarterback play. When you think, because guys who kind of get there are doing it by throwing it. But then if you really investigate, it's like, can they really throw it? It's like, oh, there's probably some circumstance there that's making them look better than they are.
Was that the Tanner Morgan, Rashad Bateman, Tyler Johnson, Kirk Soraka offense?
Yeah. When they were like 10-2. Yeah. 2020, Justin Fields again. Michael Penix. It's like, oh, who's that guy? Who's the number 2 quarterback this year? Future number 2 Heisman guy who probably should have won it and led his team to the college football playoff national championship game. Yeah, Michael Penix. That was kind of crazy. 2021, CJ Stroud, Aiden O'Connell is the number 2 guy, both in 21 and 22 behind CJ. And then 2023, we now get to the world where Ohio State, again, for the first time, like in a decade, basically, doesn't have the best quarterback in the Big Ten. JJ McCarthy is coaches and media. Talia Tagovailoa is 2nd, and Kyle McCord is 3rd. So that's a run where it's clearly Ohio State for that decade, Bill. After it clearly wasn't Ohio State for the previous decade. But then you run through the competition, and it's not a ton of competition they are beating out Tanner Morgan and Trace McSorley and Aiden O'Connell and Connor Cook and Taylor Martinez, to be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. It's like, well, yeah, of course. If those are the other options, of course Ohio State should have the best quarterback in the Big Ten, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like Connor Cook played in the NFL, right? And Aiden O'Connell was like a
scooch for Connor Cook, and he fell in the 4th round. And Aiden O'Connell, Aiden O'Connell Aiden O'Connell might take over the starting quarterback job for the Raiders.
Yeah, so he's not an awful quarterback. But I think your point stands. Like if that's the number 2 guy in your league, you'd probably like a little more upside than that. But yeah, of course, yeah, it was not a particularly deep quarterback league once you got past Ohio State for a very long time. Like here and there, somebody might rise up like a McSorley, like an O'Connell, but by and large, like there was just not a whole lot going on at that position aside from Ohio State.
All right, so that was 10 out of 12 from 2012 on, where it was Ohio State. I just want to run through this really quick. This is educational for the people in their 20s who didn't live through this, or for the people who are older who did live through it and just want to shake their head. These are the years that Ohio State only had the best quarterback 1 out of 11 years. 2001, Antoine Randall L. from Indiana. Steve Belisari was the Ohio State quarterback. Okay. Antoine Randall L. was a heck of a player. 2002, Brad Banks from Iowa, when Iowa was also undefeated in Big Ten play and went to the Orange Bowl. Really good Big Ten quarterback. I think Ohio State fans would have taken Craig Krenzel, though. And then 2003, it's not Krenzel again. It's John Navarre from Michigan. And again, it's like Craig Krenzel just led your team to the national championship and is back, and he's not the Big Ten quarterback of the year. So whatever. 2004, Drew Tate the year Justin Zwick's the quarterback for Ohio State. Drew Tate from Iowa. Also, Kyle Orton from Purdue is in the mix this year. Those are exactly the kind of quarterbacks that come to mind for me when I think about Big Ten quarterbacks of the Tressel era. Drew Tate and Kyle Orton. And again, Kyle Orton played in the NFL for like a long time and started some games, but Drew Tate is a perfect encapsulation of that. 2005, Brett Bazinet from Northwestern is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. What are we doing? And it's also one of those, do you think Brett Bazinet would have beaten Michigan at the end of the year? Like, you want to put Brett Bazinet out there throwing the helicopter pass to Anthony Gonzalez? I don't know who's voting for this. It's not like they didn't know who Troy Smith was by 2005. It's like, who's the Ohio State quarterback? I don't know. Screw those guys. Let's vote for Brett Bazinet. 2006, it's Troy. 2007, it's Chad Henne from Michigan, because Todd Beckman leads Ohio State back to the national championship game, but you'd rather have Chad Henne. He was a huge recruit. I get it. 8 and 9, it's Darrell Clark of Penn State. And then in 2010, Denard Robinson from Michigan is 1 for the coaches, 2 for the media. Dan Persa from Northwestern is 1 for the media, and Scott Tolzien is 2 for the coaches. And this is just the Big Ten hating Terrell Pryor. You're like, give me Scott Tolzien. Give me Dan Persa. Terrell Pryor is not first or second team in 2010 when Ohio State was number 1 at a point in the season that year. And like, everybody's just like, oh yeah, Darrell Clark over Terrell Pryor, no doubt about it. That's just hating them, aren't they? They're just hating. It's fine. Yeah. But come on. That's about as blatant of we did not like Terrell Pryor. We did not like the way that Ohio State acquired Terrell Pryor, so we're not voting for him.
Yeah, I when you asked me how many times did Ohio State win over that decade, I added an extra year because I thought Terrell Pryor won one. Because how could he have not have won one?
Yeah,
but
because he's no Darrell Clark.
I'm actually, I knew Darrell. Yeah, Darrell Clark in 2008 was pretty good. I was surprised he won too. I'm also surprised Michael Robinson, like the Brett Bazinet year was Michael Robinson year at Penn State too, right? Why didn't Michael Robinson win that year? But yeah, Terrell Pryor, who is perhaps to this day still the freakiest dude to ever play quarterback in the Big Ten, and maybe will be forever. Did not winning conference quarterback of the year because people didn't like the way that he arrived at Ohio State as a travesty.
Yeah. He's no Darrell Clark. So anyway, so that's the world. But we're living in this Drew Tate, Brett Bazinet, Darrell Clark world for the first 10 years of this century. Like, that's the world that the Big Ten's living in. And that's the world, like, when I talk about covering like boring good Ohio State, it's in the Brett Bazinet, Drew Tate, Kyle Orton, Darrell Clark world, where you're like, I don't know, do you think AJ Hawk and James Laurinaitis and Malcolm Jenkins and Cam Hayward are going to be able to handle Darrell Clark and Brett Bazinet? It's like, yeah, I think they will. And it's like, okay, I guess Ohio State's going to go undefeated in the Big Ten again and then get to a bowl and lose to an SEC team. And that's the world. Boring good because that, and then Urban Meyer came and it was like, could we maybe elevate? Could we take a scooch? So again, if I'm saying like, man, would you want JT Barrett and Trace McSorley? It's like, compared to Brett Bazinet and Drew Tate, I would. So it's an evolution, is it not? Like, we had a 10-year period of this. It's like we're crawling out of the muck. We're crawling out of the Drew Tate, Brett Bazinet muck. And we're evolving into JT Barrett and Trace McSorley. And now maybe we're in the next evolution, right?
Yeah.
And I think Ohio State evolved. Ohio State did evolve with Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, CJ Stroud. They evolved, but now maybe the rest of the league will evolve too. So like, okay, we needed to lay it down. It's quite a history lesson, is it not? Do you feel like we informed the people there?
We did. I'm like hearing all these names. It's really shocking to me that the Big Ten went from 1994 to 2018 without a first-round NFL quarterback.
Because one of the things that's crazy is like, by the way, you know who is in there completely lost? Like, people saying, he might be the 7th best quarterback in the league. Kirk Cousins, who's now made $1 billion in the NFL. And that was part of it too in the Big Ten. I think there are times like Big Ten defenses and not enough good Big Ten skill players ate up some guys who actually maybe were good quarterbacks. And Kirk Cousins is the perfect example of that. So, okay. So here's the second part of this evolution. As we're sort of asking the question, should Ohio State have the best quarterback in the Big Ten every year? Oregon and USC are now here. And just looking in the last 10 years, I just want to read a couple of the guys that would have been in contention for Big Ten quarterback of the year in the last decade if USC and Oregon were here earlier. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb Williams from USC. Heard of him? Heisman winner, number one pick in the draft. He was around at USC the past 2 years. Bo Nix, first round pick at Oregon the last 2 years. Heard of him? Justin Herbert, 2016 to 2019 at Oregon, first round pick. Heard of him? 2016 and 17 at USC, Sam Darnold, top 3 pick. Heard of him? 2012 to 2014, Marcus Mariota at Oregon, Heisman winner. Ohio State saw him in the national championship game. So now these teams, Landis, this is past the Drew Tate era, but this is the heart of the JT Barrett, Trace McSorley era. And now you potentially are dropping Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Justin Herbert. And now as Ohio State evolves to Justin Fields and CJ Stroud, you are also dropping in Bo Nix and Caleb Williams into that. It's a new world. So this makes the discussion much more interesting. But of all the things that are coming to the Big Ten that have arrived in the Big Ten, I think we're a little tricked. I think we're maybe a little tricked for the moment. And listen, USC and Oregon have certainly changed in the past 10 years. But 1 year of Dylan Gabriel and Miller Moss at USC, I don't know is representative of what type of quarterback we should expect from Oregon and USC, but they're changing the game when it comes to Big Ten quarterback play.
Yeah, they are. I also am curious about what we might get out of Oregon in terms of like high school quarterback recruiting. We don't know yet because they haven't done it. Like just keep taking transfers. Lincoln Riley and USC obviously is always going to be in the mix for the best quarterbacks in the country. So that changes the game, I think, in the Big Ten to just have a presence like that at that particular position in the conference. The other thing too, like it is mostly these guys, right, who are going to kind of change it. But then like the transfer portal, I think changes it for everybody as well. Like if you're in a world where mid-tier Big Ten teams can go out and get SEC transfers from guys who were fairly highly rated recruits, but like either didn't play where they were before or had a hard time finding their footing where they were before, like, and all of a sudden they come to the Big Ten and start to play a little better, like that ups the floor of the quarterback play in the conference too. But like I guess the way that I view it is forever, basically, Ohio State has kind of like had to lead the charge with quarterback play in this conference, or at least in the very recent history. And now I don't think it'll be alone in doing that because you're adding programs like USC and Oregon to the picture that I think will be able to go out and compete for the best high school quarterbacks in the country year after year. I don't know that the rest of the Big Ten will be able to do that, but those two teams I think should and can be able to do that. And obviously Ohio State can. And that's just a little different for Ohio State.
You on alert for a Jackson Arnold transfer to the Big Ten next year? Oklahoma benched 5-star quarterback?
Maybe.
Shouldn't they be exploring? Shouldn't their Big Ten teams already having conversations about getting their NIL together for Jackson Arnold?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think because Jackson Arnold's from Texas, so like obviously all the Texas schools would be in play, or maybe most of them, not Texas itself, but yeah, I think so. I think that is a swing worth taking. Whatever you think of Jackson Arnold and how he's played this year, that's a swing worth taking for 15 of the 18 teams in the Big Ten, right? Yeah, I think so. So, okay, so we understand this, and the end result of this is we're going to get to Bill's rankings of the best Big Ten quarterbacks this year. That is the final goal of this podcast, to figure out where Ohio State's quarterback play is right now in this league, in a world where 20 years ago, they kind of didn't have the best quarterback. Then for the past 10 years, they kind of always had the best quarterback. What do they have now? What will they have in the future? And who's going to be challenging them? And how many weekends a year in conference play in the future will Ohio State take the field and have us think, oh no, they probably don't have the best quarterback in this game. So then what's the different way that they're going to win? Right? I probably should have had a full statement of purpose like that
29 minutes ago. But I like to remind people half an hour into the show why we're here.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's do what we're thinking about the future of the Big Ten at the quarterback position. So we want to talk about. I wrote this down and then I was like, I'll double back and make sure I have all this written out, and I forgot to do that. So we're doing this a little bit off the top of our head. Future of the quarterback position in the Big Ten. So we can have this conversation 2025 and beyond as we think about this stuff. Let's start with Ohio State with Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland on the roster and Tavian St. Clair coming. How good do you feel about the future of the quarterback position for Ohio State?
I think about as good as I could feel. Yeah, I think that's Julian Sayin as viewed as like kind of one of like the next kind of guys at the position in the sport. I think that is how he is viewed by people who do the recruiting stuff. Yep. Aaron Noland, I think, is a really good quarterback prospect too. And obviously Tavian St. Clair is going to come in as a 5-star potential number 1 guy at his position as a true freshman. So it's really good, right? I guess when the time comes, we'll see what we're talking about in terms of like actual in-game experience for Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland when they're competing for the starting job. But just from a raw kind of traits and ceiling perspective, it's excellent.
I think Ohio State, with these 3 guys lined up, 2 here and 1 on the way, is in as good a spot as it's ever been. Maybe with the exception of when you had like JT Barrett with Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow and Tate Martell. And I'm not even saying that facetiously about Tate, but like waiting right behind him. And you thought like these guys would be ready to play. Then there's another guy for the future. Like, and we talked about that room at the moment when they had the room with JT Barrett starting and Haskins, Burrow, Martell in the room. We knew how good that potentially was, right?
Yes, but what we know of Joe Burrow in particular, I think, kind of paints that a little differently. Like no one was thinking like, Joe Burrow, he might be the best quarterback in college football if he ever gets a shot. It was just like, this guy he's from Ohio. We like him. He's got some swagger. We think he could be pretty good. I don't think we knew quite how good that room was in the moment, but people were excited about it. Yeah.
Okay. Michigan. Jaden Davis is a true freshman. He was a highly rated guy. Do you feel? Should Michigan feel like they have their quarterback future figured out? Or do you think they should should Michigan be in the Jackson Arnold sweepstakes? Like, should Michigan be very aggressive in trying to figure out its quarterback future? Or are they kind of set?
I could probably go either way on that. I guess it would depend on how this year finishes, but I think maybe their best course of action would probably be to go get like a 1-year guy to play. Okay. And allow Jaden Davis like 1 year as the number 2 before he takes over is probably what I would view as their best course of action. Yeah.
Which is probably what they should have done this year. But for them to go be getting a veteran in the portal is not a bad idea. Michigan State, we think, is set for a couple years with Aiden Childs, right?
Yes. Yeah. 2-3 years. Yeah.
So he's starting right now. Played at Oregon State last year. Now in year 2 as a college football player, year 1 as a starter with Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. We like him. Penn State's future is it Ethan Grunkmeyer, who's an Ohio recruit, who was like a top 10 national guy. It was kind of a pretty big get for Penn State, right? Do you feel like they're set with that? Is Bo Pribula potentially a future starter in your mind? I guess like Aller could certainly be back next year. Do you think Penn State's in a pretty good spot with their room?
Yeah, I think so. Pribula is interesting because like I think Andy Koltenicky could build a pretty compelling offensive plan around a guy like Bo Pribula, who is like, I think, much more in the Trace McSorley kind of mold than even Drew Aller is. He's almost like a carbon copy of Trace McSorley, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
So like between Grunkmeyer, I thought they had another one. Jackson Smolik is another, the young guy they got there who was like a kind of a dark horse performer at the Elite 11. So not like the best quarterback prospects in the world coming out of high school, but pretty solid room there they have behind Drew Aller.
Okay. Maryland, they got MJ Morris as a transfer from North Carolina State. I think a lot of us thought he'd win the job this year. He didn't. So Billy Edwards is playing, but I don't know. Mike Locksley will probably figure it out, right?
Yeah,
a decent quarterback.
It feels like they're playing MJ Morris to me in a way that is like, we don't think you're quite ready for this now, but you're still the future. Like they're putting him in the game. So I think like a year for MJ Morris to marinate in that offense a little bit while Billy Edwards starts could give you a decent MJ Morris in 2025.
Yeah. Rutgers, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, he'll be there a couple of years, right? Like he's not a one-time transfer for Rutgers.
No, he's not a guy that I think is going to like leave early to go to the NFL either. So he's there for a couple of years.
Indiana, Curtis Rourke, the Ohio transfer, is playing now and playing very well, but you really like Tyler Cherry as a future guy, right? Is he a true freshman right now?
He's a true freshman right now. I like him, but Taven Jackson is still there too. He's got eligibility left. Like he's a pretty big athletic dude and looked good in their spring game. And I think they like kind of his upside as well. So between Jackson and Cherry, I think they're okay. But I also like Kurt Signetti seems to me like the kind of guy who would like to take a mighty big swing in the transfer portal if he can, just to kind of prove a point about his program. So I think they'll probably add somebody to start next year who's not on their roster currently.
Okay. Interesting. But Cherry was Cherry's a pretty highly ranked guy.
Yeah. He's big. He's like 6'5", 230 pounds. He was Center Grove High School where Caden Curry went. It was a major deal for them to kind of flip him. I don't know if they flipped him, but they got him very late in the process after that staff was hired. And he's got some decent upside. I just don't know if he'll be ready as a second-year guy.
Okay. Purdue, Marcos Davila, we liked in the spring, feels like he could give them a little hope. They're kind of in a bit of a pit right now with the way they played the past couple of weeks. And Hudson Card has not made the leap. They need to be thinking about what's next after Hudson Card, but it might be Davila, right?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think like Purdue is different to me from Indiana, who I think like might take a transfer because they want to like maintain a winning kind of pedigree that Kurt Signetti has. Like Purdue might be better served to just kind of build around a young quarterback for a couple of years and even take some lumps in 2025 if that's the case, right? So I think that's their guy.
Luke Altmaier is playing well at Illinois, but we like Donovan Leary in the spring as a young guy. It feels like they have a plan for the future there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. Donovan Leary, was he like a second-year guy or third-year guy? He's got a couple of years. I think they've got a succession plan there. I think for Luke Altmaier,
like guys in the pipeline. Wisconsin, the future might be here. Tyler Van Dyke, the Miami transfer, got hurt. Is out for the year. They're going to play Braden Locke, but maybe Matoyer, who's from Texas and a big guy, is a true freshman. I think Luke Fickell does not want to get to him this year, but I think he should be and will be the starting quarterback next year. And that's the guy that they recruited finally to get a high school guy to run this offense that they want to run. If the offense and Phil Longo, the coordinator, can hang around long enough, year 3 of Luke Fickell next year, they might have a guy who can actually be the pilot of that offense. But I think maybe Matoyer has a chance. He might just have a new offensive coordinator by next year.
Yeah, I think they should play him now. Like, I don't know what the point of playing Braden Locke, who's a former high school teammate of Jackson Smith and Jigba's, I believe, is going to play for them, and that's who started against Ohio State last year, and he's not very good. So like I would go to the future now. I don't know why they wouldn't, but I think he is the future beyond this year, certainly.
Northwestern, I don't think they have a current quarterback or a future quarterback, so I don't know what they're doing.
Nope. Maybe just go Wildcat all the time.
Hey, they are the Wildcats. They could go Wildcat. Nebraska, they're pretty good because they have Dylan Raiola for this year, the next, and he's off to a good start, right? Like I feel like he's living up to a lot of hype.
Yeah, he is. It's not surprising, right? But they have a guy who is very clearly ready to play right now as a true freshman, and like what he could be in a year and 2 years, especially, is probably pretty exciting for them. And then they got his little brother too. They got a commitment from Dayton Raiola this week. Oh, they did? Dayton is he's not nearly the prospect that his brother is, but yeah, they took his commitment.
Oh, well, congratulations to the Raiola family for that. One-time Ohio State commit. Iowa. I don't know what Iowa's quarterback plan for the future is. Do you? Do they have a guy?
So, well, they have Brendan Sullivan, who I think could play next year, right?
Brendan Sullivan.
They're also putting him in the games.
They're putting him in the games. Northwestern transfer who played last year. I feel like as good as Iowa is, if you're not going to have a Brian Ferentz offense to scare quarterbacks away, you should be able to elevate that. I think they are longing for Drew Tate. I don't want to live in a world where Drew Tate is the best quarterback in the Big Ten, but I think I do want to live in a world where Drew Tate is the Iowa quarterback. I think they need to elevate that position. If they win 10 games this year, I think that should be, Cade McNamara went there, but I think we found out that Cade McNamara definitely has a ceiling. I'm not saying Jackson Arnold's going to go to Iowa, but shouldn't Iowa be a winning place with a more functional offense that could be attractive in the portal?
I think it could be, and we're this big boy school. We know the state of the world. Like if someone leaves Ohio State's quarterback room, perhaps someone from South Dakota, like I'm making a phone call if I'm Iowa, right? To Lincoln
Kienholz starting Hawkeye quarterback. I think Minnesota. I think Kirk Ferentz and PJ Fleck would maybe meet in Rapid City or Sioux Falls or some South Dakota city and have a cage match for the rights to Lincoln Kienholz. Right?
I like
He's
that.
transformative. Yeah. Lincoln Kienholz is probably QB4 at Ohio State. He's potentially transformative for either of those programs.
Yes, I think he could be. He's crazy athletic and I think the people either one of the seats like, what is this? We can do this at quarterback? Oh, okay. We'll do that.
Minnesota does have Drake Lindsay as a young backup right now, who I think has a future. So they're not as desperate, I think, as Iowa for a future. So I think even if they don't get Lincoln Kienholz, Minnesota might be okay. I don't know what UCLA is doing. They're in the Big Ten. We care about them the least of anybody in the Big Ten. Do you know what they're doing? Do we care?
I have no idea what they're doing. They had Dante Moore, and now they don't have him. And I don't know if Ethan Garbers has eligibility beyond this year or not.
Yeah. Okay. Washington has Damon Williams as a true freshman who had been committed to Arizona, followed Jed Fish to Washington. They lost Demarcus Davis, who transferred out, who had been Washington's quarterback recruit. But the bottom line is they're playing Williams in some situations. You keep mentioning, I think it's really smart to mention the guys who are getting a little bit of run. It is the J.J. McCarthy behind Cade McNamara model. You give them a little bit of run and get them some experience. Yeah. But I think of any team, what Michigan did in 21 with McCarthy getting some snaps behind McNamara, what Damon Williams is doing behind Will Rogers at Washington reminds me of that the most. And I think Damon Williams has a chance to be a pretty good starter for Washington starting next year.
I think so too. He's super athletic. He's got a pretty live arm. He clearly the guy they want to build the program around at Washington, and they get the 1 year rental from Will Rogers in the meantime.
And legit. And then Oregon, as you said, Dante Moore from Detroit, committed to Oregon, decommitted, went to UCLA last year, started about half the games, left, went back to Oregon. So he is in his first year at Oregon, his second year as a college football player. He's the backup to Dillon Gabriel, but they got him to be the starter in 2025. It's a circuitous route, but it's a little bit like Quinn Ewers and Texas. It's like, well, he came to Ohio State for a year, but was he kind of always a Longhorn? Maybe was Dante Moore kind of always a Duck and he just went to UCLA for a year? Does this feel like a plan? And I think Oregon has to get off this carousel of relying on transfer quarterbacks. I think Dante Moore is a transfer, but not in the same way that Dillon Gabriel and Bo Nix were, as like finished products coming to Oregon. Is Dante Moore a good future plan for a school as good as Oregon?
I think so. He was not very good playing as a true freshman at UCLA, right? But I'm willing to attribute much of that to the environment, I guess, just not a particularly good roster.
Just because he's here doesn't mean probably, you can't blame Chip.
No, I mean, it doesn't seem like maybe that Chip and that staff put a young quarterback in the best position to be successful. So I'm not rating Dante Moore off because of that, but I do have some questions about exactly what that is based off what I saw last year as a true freshman. So, but yeah, I mean, the guy who was 5-star prospect in the conversation for best quarterback prospect in his class is certainly not a bad place to start for anybody.
Yeah. And then the last one is USC. So they have Jaden Maeva, who started at UNLV last year and then transferred to USC. And they also have Julian Lewis, who's like a 5-star quarterback for now. So he's a 5-star. He's going to stay a 5-star quarterback. He might not stay committed to USC, but USC has him. If he flips, he's not going to flip to Indiana, is he? Because he's visited Indiana and has been all this stuff. Well,
no, I don't think. I would think Indiana probably does not have the pockets for that one, but we'll see.
Okay, maybe Coach Siggs is going into his own pockets for that. So anyway, if USC has Jaden Maeva as and I don't even know what Miller Moss's eligibility is. I guess maybe he'll be the quarterback he's been there for a while. But is that getting like a UNLV starter, a young starter to transfer and then having Julian Lewis lined up? That feels like a plan. If Julian Lewis falls through and it's just like, oh, who's your future? Because their other 5-star quarterback transferred, who was the backup last year, Malachi Nelson, transferred to Boise and then didn't even win the job at Boise. It feels like that was just a miss by USC in that recruitment or where in the development or something. Is USC we're talking about, hey, USC and Oregon, they've had quarterbacks in the past that would have been Big Ten quarterbacks of the year. Is USC positioned to continue to have quarterbacks like that? Or do you have questions about what Lincoln Riley is doing in that room?
I have questions. It looks like Miller Moss has one more year after this one. I have questions about like the shine being off of Lincoln Riley just a little bit because of, I mean, like getting nothing out of Caleb Williams. Like I would think that resonates with quarterbacks in a way that's probably not all that beneficial to USC. And I also wonder too about the move to the Big Ten. Like USC is not going to be playing all of its games in the sunshine on the beaches anymore, right? And I wonder, like SoCal quarterbacks in particular. And like I know that like Julian Sainz at Ohio State, so I'm not putting them all in the same box, but I wonder just if it becomes as much of a destination based off of some changing dynamics at USC. I think it will still be a destination, but there was a time where it was just like, yep, best quarterback in the class, he's going to play for Lincoln Riley. And I don't know if it's going to be that way anymore.
So you don't think USC quarterbacks will be lined up to go to the big house and have their heads torn off by Josiah Stewart? Sign me up.
Right.
Do you think Big Ten defenses actually deter good quarterbacks from coming to the Big Ten? Or what I think they definitely do at times is they make functional, competent, possibly good quarterbacks look not as good. Especially if you have a Big Ten quarterback who has skills but is dropped into a team without a great offensive line, without multiple skill players. Kirk Cousins example, where it's like, is this guy, I don't know, is he any good or not? And it's like, oh no, he was good. He just was going up against real defenses almost every week, and he didn't have the guys around him. So if that's the world that USC is going to live in, where Lincoln Riley before, I guess they had good offensive lines at Oklahoma, but if they weren't paying for their mistakes or their shortcomings or their flaws in the Big 12, the same way you're going to pay in the Big 10. Jay Higgins is going to make you pay. Josiah Stewart's going to make you pay. JT Tuimoloau is going to make you pay. Abdul Clutter is going to make you pay. Almost every school has a guy that's going to make you pay. Will that depress the USC QB market and production?
I think it could. I think maybe the thing that USC might encounter sort of in the near term is people waiting for a proof of concept in the Big Ten, right? Like Lincoln Riley had it in the Big 12, and I think that carried over with him with the Pac-12. But I do think people understand that perhaps the Big Ten is a little more of a meat grinder kind of league, right? And maybe there'll be some quarterbacks in the next 2-3 years who will want to see Lincoln Riley's offense have success in that environment before they're like, oh yeah, it's still Lincoln Riley's offense, I'm going to go there.
Yeah. Okay. I think for the 18 Big Ten teams, beyond the guy who's playing right now, it feels like to me, at least maybe 14 or 15 of the schools have a plan, at least a guy that I think you can see it. And everybody loves a backup quarterback, but I feel like the Big Ten is getting after it in quarterback recruiting in a way they weren't maybe 10 years ago. So maybe outside of Northwestern, which is in a mess, maybe Rutgers after Kaliak Manis, I'm not sure where they're going, and UCLA, I think you can at least see the future for almost everybody else. And I think that's encouraging. Like as a conference, I think it's encouraging. From an Ohio State perspective, it's like, okay, maybe it's not going to be as much of NFL quarterback versus future accountant quarterback that Ohio State, I think, had been encountering for much of the previous decade.
Yeah, I think that'll change. I still think, as I said at the start of the show, like Ohio State, I think it'll always be operating at the top of that list. And I think most years will still be the one that everyone is kind of looking up to in terms of quarterback play. But I think the floor of the quarterback play in the conference year to year, I think will be somewhat significantly better than it has been in the previous decade when it was like pure dominance from Ohio State at the position.
And I do think, like, we're talking about, for instance, I think USC and Ohio State remains a good quarterback comparison. If USC had Julian Sayin in the building and Tavian St. Clair on the way, you'd be like, oh my gosh, Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley's done it again. Old Bambi. Hey, man, congratulations, Bambi. You're growing up. That's my new nickname for Lincoln Riley, by the way. I said it on one show, and then they lost at Michigan, and I'm definitely keeping it. Bambi got it done. And instead, Bambi has The guy he thought was the future transferred to Boise. They had to go get the UNLV quarterback as a transfer, which is like, I guess seems like a plan, but it's not a plan. That's a little bit of a desperation plan anyway. And now maybe the guy who's committed to them might not wind up there. As opposed to Ohio State takes Julian Sand from Alabama and Tavian St. Clair. They were in on Tavian St. Clair when he was in 4th grade. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, like Ohio State identified and locked down Tavian St. Clair before anybody else realized quite what the deal was with this guy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Ohio State, I don't think wanted anybody else to get a look at him. Like once he turned into the monster that he is right now, Ohio State was like, yeah, we can't let that kid ever leave Ohio. So let's lock that down. Yeah.
Which is but it's so, you have to go out and get guys nationally at this position, and they do. But in a world where Mitch Trubisky was from Ohio, and Drew Aller was from Ohio, and Ethan Gruckmeyer's from Ohio, and some guys get out, but like and like on purpose, right? Ohio State, all those guys, I think if they would have said, that's our guy. Now, again, you could look back and say, oh man, I don't know. I think maybe Ohio State could have used Mitch Trubisky or whatever. But when it's the guy, you cannot let that guy get out, and Ohio State put a promise ring on that guy, and that was it. It was over when he was 15. So, like, it's one of those things. It's the obvious, but I think you have to acknowledge the obvious when it happens, because when the obvious doesn't happen, you go crazy. And if Tavian St. Clair was committed to Georgia right now, I wouldn't be able to sleep.
Yeah. I mean, that would be like Justin Fields committing to Ohio State when he was a high school player in Georgia out of high school. It's the same kind of dynamic. Yeah. Although Justin Fields, I guess, did commit to Penn State until Georgia ultimately got him back. So, I
mean, but Kirby like fumbled that going both directions.
Yeah.
Kirby's like, he didn't get him early enough. Then he was like, no, come here. Then he didn't plan, then he lost him again. So he lost him at the beginning and he lost him at the end. And then in the middle, he got like 6 red zone series out of him. Woo!
And a fake punt.
And he's the future of college football, by the way. Get ready for that. That's what's happening this week. We're going to do that on KOTN on Wednesday. Like the future, the battle for the soul of the South, passing the torch from Alabama to Kirby. Would you pass a torch to Kirby?
Mm-mm.
You know what I wouldn't pass to Kirby? Car keys.
The car keys. Yeah.
So that's where we are. Past, future. Now it's present. And that means the Big Ten quarterback rankings from the one and only Bill Landis next on Kings of Columbus. Back on Kings of Columbus, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We'd appreciate you guys giving us a thumb on YouTube, maybe dropping a review for the podcast feed on Apple Podcasts if you're listening there, subscribing on YouTube if you're not subscribed. We certainly appreciate everybody who is here and has been part of the podcast feed on YouTube and on podcasts for as long as we've been doing this. And if you have not watched or listened to Kings of the North, we just would maybe suggest you try it out, because Bill, honestly, for the first month of the year, we haven't done a ton of Ohio State talk there, because from a Northern 2018 perspective, Ohio State hasn't been doing a ton of interesting stuff because the competition hasn't been very good, but now it's here. Now, as you get into Big Ten play, starting with Michigan State this week, there's great reason to talk about Ohio State when we're talking about the most interesting, best teams in the North. So we'll be doing more Buckeyes on Kings of the North, and we'll see you guys there.
Yeah, we definitely will be. And that'll start this week with Michigan State, but also like we give the biggest games in the North like a fairly decent amount of time and consideration. And Ohio State is staring down the barrel of 1 in 2 weeks with Iowa. So we'll definitely be hitting that one hard. Yes, we will.
Okay, let's do the Bill Landis Big Ten quarterback rankings. Per your suggestion, Bill, we're going to start at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So just explain your thought process as you did these rankings 1 through 18.
Yeah, I tried to mostly take just like a pure statistical approach to this, like who is playing the best right now. It's not necessarily like who will I take to win a game tomorrow. That probably worked its way in some, but I really just tried to focus on who is playing to sort of their maximum capabilities at the moment and who is playing the best in the Big Ten right now. So it might look a little weird, maybe at the top, but I think the bottom was like pretty clear cut, right? Like Aiden Childs at 10 for Michigan State was at the point where I was like, okay, like the rest of these guys are just kind of like the same. So like put them in whichever order you want. So Starting at 10, it's Aiden Childs at Michigan State. 11, I had Hudson Card at Purdue. 12th is Ethan Kaliakmanis at Rutgers. 13th is Max Brosmer at Minnesota. He's the transfer from the University of New Hampshire. 14th was Cade McNamara at Iowa. 15th was Ethan Garbers at UCLA. 16 is Alex Orji at Michigan. And I just picked guys who were starting now, right? So I don't have Davis Warren here.
Yeah.
So he's the Michigan representative, Orji. 17 is Jack Lausch at Northwestern, who just took over that job 2 weeks ago. And then 18th is Braden Locke at Wisconsin, who is now their starting quarterback moving forward with the injury to Tyler Van Dyke.
Is Childs, we've talked a lot about Childs on KOTN. He's made some big plays. He's turned the ball over a lot too.
Yeah.
Is Childs at number 10 the beginning of guys that you would be pretty happy with at quarterback? Or is he the top of the list of guys who you're kind of like, I don't know right now?
Probably the former. I would say the beginning of the list of guys who I think like have something to them, or are either have shown flashes and have something to them, or are just outright playing well. There's just a lot of. I mean, he's young, right? It's not. He's. I think he's 18 or 19. He's only a true sophomore. Like you'll watch one player, like that guy looks like he could be the best quarterback in the Big Ten, and you watch another like that guy looks like he should be playing college football. Like there's a lot of up and down there with him. But like he's some of the stats that I looked at, like. Aiden Childs is 4th in the conference in air yards per attempt. He's 4th in big time throws, the PFF stat. He's 1st in quarterback rushing yards. He's 1st in quarterback rushing touchdowns. He also has the most turnover worthy plays with 11.
Yeah.
And there's a I was trying to figure out a way to like kind of like discern like who's been accurate. And there's a stat on Sports Info Solutions, which is just like on target throws. Aiden Childs is 17th out of 18 quarterbacks I charted in on target throws. So he's not been an especially accurate quarterback to this point either. So that's why he's at the bottom. Like it's a guy we talk about a lot on KOTN as like someone we think is a ton of upside. But the reason he is 10th right now is because he's not like playing to that full potential just yet, which is fine. But you know, I have to be honest about it.
And this matters. This is a good conversation to have on this show because that's what Ohio State's facing on Saturday. It's this guy who is going. Do you expect against the Ohio State defense, Aiden Childs is going to make a couple plays that are going to drive Ohio State fans crazy or maybe earn the respect of Ohio State fans? And then also, I don't know, I would place a bet on strip sack. I think guy.
Yeah, I might place a bet on a strip sack and place a bet on like an interception or two. But he also, there's going to be like a 3rd and 9 where Ohio State has 6 defenders around Aiden Childs looking like they're about to sack him, and then he's going to somehow slip out of it and get a first down because he does that too, right? So it's but he'll I think I guess he could look totally overwhelmed playing against a defense like this, but I think he'll make a play or two where we're like, oh yeah, like I can. He's not ready now, but I can definitely see it.
I think the guys with natural talent are less likely to look overwhelmed. I think the guys who often look overwhelmed against Ohio State are the competent quarterbacks who, when they have time, when they can make a read, look pretty good. And then when they face a bunch of NFL guys on a defense, then they look terrible. Mm-hmm. And so I think Aiden Childs is like, okay, I don't think he's going to be consistent, but he has enough, I think, natural skill that it will flash in moments. And just because Sonny Styles is coming on a blitz or because Jack Sawyer smoked the tackle and is in his face right away, I don't think he's going to necessarily collapse in the moment every single time, where I think like game managers, I feel like I've seen too many years where Ohio State eats game managers for lunch.
Yeah. Because game managers like in their mind know that they can't take off, right? They know they're kind of just like sitting there waiting to be preyed upon in a way. Like Aiden Childs knows like, okay, this is a little, there's a lot of stuff happening right now, but like I know I can run, so I'll just do that.
I will say Hudson Card 7 of 17 for 56 yards against Oregon State last week and 11 of 24 for 124 against Notre Dame the game before that. Feels high at 11.
Yeah, it's like I didn't go through like game by game to kind of like really parse production. Like pure production, Hudson Card holds up pretty well against the other guys at the bottom of the list, but that's like almost all being practically perfect in their first game of the year and very little to do with the last 2 weeks. But yeah, so he should probably, I think maybe if you wanted to put him behind Kaliakmanis and Brosmer.
That's what I would do.
And perhaps McNamara.
Maybe McNamara.
I think you could put Card 13th and move the other two guys up.
If I was making a line of like Where's the line of schools who aren't really super excited about their quarterback play right now? I think in that group would be Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan, UCLA, Iowa, and Purdue. And I think there's enough potential with Brosmer and what they're trying to do. I mean, it's potential for 1 year because he's a sixth-year guy. And then I think Ethan Caliac-Manis is kind of doing what Greg Schiano brought him in to do. Yeah. And so I think I would then have like 12 guys who are in the like, okay, and then 6 teams that are like, I don't know what to do at quarterback right now. So, which again, I feel like sometimes you've been in the Big Ten, it's like 2/3 of the league is like, I don't know what we're doing right now at quarterback. So it's only 1/3. It's only 6 out of 18. Okay, but I would put Caliac-Manis and Brosmer then a tier below Childs, because I think Childs again is probably the bottom of we'll take that. There's something there. It's not perfect, but we'll take it. Caliac-Manis and Brosmer are kind of like, steady as she goes, and then 6 schools where you're not sure what's going on. Okay,
yeah, I think Rutgers and Minnesota are like in the could be worse kind of category.
Yes,
and then everyone else is like, God, I wish we had somebody else.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. Okay, which means we have a top 10 of like real 10. If Aiden Childs, for all his flaws, if he's the 10th best quarterback in your league, not bad. I take that. I actually think Aiden Childs might be better than the 10th best quarterback in the SEC.
Probably
we don't have to do that exercise, but that's not embarrassing. Okay, let's do your top 9 then.
Okay, so people aren't going to like this, but I'll explain it. Let me just run through them real quick. Number 1, I have Curtis Rourke from Indiana. Number 2, Drew Allard from Penn State. Number 3, Will Howard from Ohio State. Number 4, Luke Altmaier from Illinois. Number 5, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon. Number 6, Billy Edwards at Maryland. Number 7, Miller Moss at USC. That was I don't love that one. I was a little torn on what to do with 7, 8, 9. I have Dylan Raiola from Nebraska at number 8, and Will Rogers from Washington at number 9.
Got one for you. You want one? You want to light one up for Coach Siggs having the best quarterback in the Big Ten? I don't know, brother. I don't know.
He has the quarterback he's the quarterback who is playing the best in the Big Ten.
Bill Landis. This is going to go up. They're going to show this list on the broadcast. Indiana, Maryland, a matchup of top 6 Big Ten quarterbacks. Yeah. Curtis Rourke versus Billy Edwards.
Curtis Rourke might throw 3 picks against Maryland. I'll look like an idiot. But I told all the things. I'll tell you all the categories. I tried to go through and chart here. It was completion percentage, passing yards, touchdowns, interceptions, yards per attempt, air yards per attempt, big time throws, turnover worthy plays, and on target passes. There was one quarterback who was top 5 in all of those categories, and it was Curtis Rourke. And he's also number 2 in the country in EPA per dropback. He's just playing incredibly well. So I'm not sitting here telling you I think that Curtis Rourke is definitely a better quarterback than Will Howard or Drew Allard or Dylan Gabriel, but I am telling you that through the first almost month of the season, he is playing better than all of them. So that's why he's number 1.
I'm imagining you. You said you spent a lot of time on this, right?
I spent too much time on it. Yeah.
I'm imagining you coming out of your office and your wife's sitting at the breakfast table, and she's like, "Were you in there all night?" And you're like, "Yeah, I had to do Big Ten quarterback rankings. It took me hours and hours. I looked at everything." And your wife is like, "Wow, you are dedicated. What did you come up with?" And you sit down and you take a swig of coffee and you say, "Curtis Rourke's the best quarterback in the Big Ten." And she just kind of looks at you.
Yeah.
And maybe call someone. And this is because I don't think an hour's worth of analysis would lead you to this list, but 9 hours of analysis might. I'm teasing you. Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying. He is playing incredibly productive football. And it's parameters. It's all about parameters and semantics and what is your list? How many quarterbacks on this list do you think could be quarterbacks of playoff teams that you would feel comfortable taking them into a quarterfinal against Ole Miss or Tennessee or somebody like that?
Probably just 3.
Who are they?
Drew Aller, Will Howard, and Dylan Gabriel.
So is it coincidental that those three quarterbacks are the quarterbacks of the three quarterbacks you'd be most comfortable with in a playoff situation are the quarterbacks of the teams most likely to make the playoff? Is that a causational relationship or a coincidental relationship? Like it's probably both, right?
Yeah, it's some combination of both. Yeah, but it's also like it's skill sets, right? It's like can you do kind of everything? And like
yeah.
And I think those three guys can and like have done it at a pretty high level and on good teams, right? It's like Curtis Work is doing it right now for Indiana. If Curtis Work had to go out and play Georgia tomorrow, would his head be spinning? Maybe, because he's never seen anything like that before. So, I think those three, and like maybe you take a flyer on like Dylan Raiola because he's just got so much raw talent to him as a young guy. But I don't know if I'm taking anybody else on the list.
So I will say, like, in terms of like, okay, if we run it through it real quick, Aiden Childs was number 10, but you feel good about him. He's just learning as he goes. Will Rogers at number 9 for Washington has been through it at Mississippi State. And I think just feels like a competent, gives you a chance to win kind of quarterback, right? And again, I think there could be a world where if you said Will Rogers was the 4th best quarterback in the Big Ten, I think 13 years ago, Will Rogers would have been the 4th best quarterback in the Big Ten. I think it's good for the Big Ten that he's 9th on this list because I think he's doing exactly what Washington needs him to do, which is not all American level, but which is competent.
I would say like slightly more than competent. Like he's been a little better than I thought he would be, and maybe my assumptions were less about him and more about like what he would have around him. Turns out Washington still got pretty good receivers and a good running back. So. But he's been good for Washington. Like watch him play. I think like you see, you go like, oh yeah, you can play a little bit, but then like statistically, it bears itself out too. Like he's top 5 in a lot of the stuff I was looking at.
And I guess we probably don't need to do every big. It's an Ohio State show, but like Dylan Raiola, it's just he's probably never going to be lower than 8th on a list like this again until he graduates. Right?
Yeah.
Does Miller Moss? If Ohio State faces USC in a Big Ten championship game, does Miller Moss scare you? Is Miller Moss like, hey, that guy, is he that guy can beat you in a big game kind of guy, or no?
I was kind of getting there before I saw the Michigan game.
Okay.
And that brought me back a little bit. So I would say probably no, he does not scare me.
Okay. Billy Edwards is a little bit on the Curtis Work thing of like just really playing competent football, but maybe hitting his ceiling. Or do you think there's maybe more to Billy Edwards?
But I don't know if there's more than what we've seen so far, but what we've seen so far has been pretty good, right? Like that's a program that was expecting, I think, a somewhat significant drop off a quarterback from Taulia Tagovailoa, and I think Billy Edwards to this point for Maryland has been like as good as Taulia as a passer, and also gives them something on the ground that Taulia didn't give them. He's a pretty good runner too. He's got like 100 something rushing yards.
And then Luke Altmaier, this doesn't like Ohio State's not playing Illinois, right? But Luke Altmaier versus Penn State this week. We're talking about quarterback matchups. This is 2 versus 4 on your list. Luke Altmaier has been the shining example of a transfer in year 2, getting it all together in a way that I thought Hudson Card would be at Purdue. He's not, but Luke Altmaier is playing really winning football for Illinois. Again, as a guy who in the SEC had been through it a little bit, certainly wasn't great last year, but has made a leap. Like this is, I don't have any issue with Luke Altmaier at 4.
Yeah, he's made winning plays in 2 huge wins for Illinois. He has 10 touchdown passes, which leads the conference. He hasn't thrown an interception yet this year. He's throwing it downfield. It's not dink and dunk. He's running. He's 5th in the conference in rushing yards among quarterbacks. He's been productive. He is seemingly pretty comfortable in that offense. And he's got good weapons around him. Like they've done a nice job of putting a good offensive line in front of him via the transfer portal. He's got good receivers. He's got a nice stable of backs, and they've got some pretty good balance within that offense that helps him too. But he's maybe of all the guys, and there's not that many, but like of the guys who played last year who have returned, I think he is perhaps the one who's taken the biggest leap. Maybe even Drew Aller, who was also, I think, better than he was last year.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the guys that matter most to Ohio State in this conference. We'll start with Dylan Gabriel, who's on the horizon in a couple of weeks for Ohio State. Is he, and if people did not watch KOTN on Tuesday, we had on Tyson Alger, who covers Oregon. And this is a question I've been wanting to ask. And I thought he gave a very good answer on it, which is who's a better college football quarterback? Bo Nix last year, Dylan Gabriel this year for Oregon. And he very easily said Bo Nix last year, which all that tells me is, okay, Oregon's quarterback play is not quite as good as it was. So that's the point of this. It's not a shot at Dillon Gabriel, but he was talking about Bo Nix as a bigger guy, a more physical guy than Dillon Gabriel is, and which is our point in all of this stuff. And we just have to keep hammering this point in the transfer conversation. Often year 2 of a quarterback transfer is significantly more productive than year 1. And they got 2 years at Oregon out of Bo Nix. They're going to get 1 year out of Dillon Gabriel. So he was just saying how Bo Nix just knew everybody, knew everything about the Oregon offense by year 2. And Dillon Gabriel just never going to have that opportunity. So I think that really matters for any Oregon conversation because there was a lot of, I don't want to say hype. Dillon Gabriel's earned it. He has piled up stats. But it's just hard when you only get a year in a place. Right. Yeah. And so I think that if Dillon Gabriel, and again, I think it was Dillon Gabriel was the preseason Heisman favorite, and he was. That's factual. But I think it was by default because we didn't have anybody else to take it. But I don't know that this situation ever necessarily lent itself to, oh, that guy's going to own college football this year. And so far, it's only 3 games, but he's been good. But I don't think it's looked like, oh, my God, Dillon Gabriel and that offense are unstoppable.
I don't think it's looked like that either. And I think like it's the nature of that offense that maybe quarterbacks don't quite shine in that kind of way, right? It's a lot of short stuff. It's a lot of letting the receivers kind of, it's not actually all that dissimilar so far from what Ohio State has done offensively, but I don't know that I've ever really considered Dillon Gabriel is like an inherently dangerous quarterback, right? I think he's like a really good kind of like point guard quarterback who has, accumulated a ton of really impressive stats. I don't know if he's a game on the line, like go make some plays and win me this game kind of quarterback, right? I think he's a steady hand in a really good offense and has really good skill around him, but is like an individual kind of performer. I don't know that he blows you away.
Okay. Let's talk about Penn State and Drew Aller then, because this is really going to matter to Ohio State. I think there was a split opinion on what Drew Aller and Penn State would be this year. Is it a jump? Is it a leap? Is it unleashing him with the new offensive coordinator? Or year 2 as a starter, year 3 in college? Is it confirmation that Drew Aller is good, but maybe he's never going to be great? Through the first month of the season, you have them 2 on the list. Which do you think it has been closer to? Is this a Drew Aller leap, or is this a Drew Aller is who he is?
I think there's a jump there. I think he's doing the things that people were asking him to do last year, which is be more aggressive throwing the ball down the field. He leads the conference in yards per attempt. He leads the conference in air yards per attempt, actually by like a fairly significant margin. He is by far the guy who is throwing the ball down the field the most. And like, he's not a perfect quarterback. It's not like he's completing 80% of his passes while doing that. But if you saw things last year from sort of, I don't know, like a decision-making standpoint, to know that like he's not going to put the ball in harm's way. He's going to more often than not probably make good choices, but he was cautious because of that. I think he's throwing out the caution a little more now. So it's bringing out a better level of play. And he's like, as we said earlier, he's running more too. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns this year. He's 4th actually in rushing yards amongst quarterbacks. Like he didn't run at all last year, and he's got over 100 rushing yards in his 3 games so far. So I think there's definitely a step forward there. Like he's not I'm not saying he's Trevor Lawrence or Caleb Williams or anything like that, but I think he is noticeably better at the things that he was deficient in last year, this year in this offense.
Just in terms of the quarterback itself, in a game against Ohio State's defense, who would you say is more capable of making a play that really matters against Ohio State? Is it Drew Aller or is it Dillon Gabriel?
I think I would say Drew Aller, because he's got the bigger arm. He can push it down the field, and I think from like a running playmaking standpoint, he is like a big enough guy that it doesn't need to be sort of like a clean kind of picture for him to go out and make like slip a tackle and make a play kind of thing. Like Dillon Gabriel's got some rushing production, but a lot of that is from a really long rushing touchdown against Oregon State where like no one touched him. So I don't know, like if you like really get around Dylan Gabriel, given his size, that he's going to like run around some people or run through some people to make a play in the way I think Drew Allard might be able to do.
Okay. 2 more questions that relate to Ohio State and our viewers and listeners here on Kings of Columbus when it comes to Big Ten quarterbacks. Do you think Michigan can reach a point of functionality at the quarterback position by the end of the season that really allows Michigan to compete, or is that position just going to be at a deficit for them the whole year and they beat USC throwing for 30 yards, and I don't think you can beat Ohio State throwing for 30 yards. Can they get better there, or is it a bit of a lost cause at quarterback?
I lean more toward lost cause. Like, can they get better? Yeah, probably a little bit, but I just haven't seen it in the real. It's a small sample size of Alex Orji throwing the ball, but they also didn't pick him coming out of a camp for a reason. So, like, I think the sample size is telling us the truth. So, I don't know that there's enough there throwing the ball for them to get all that much better. Maybe slightly better, but yeah, I don't think what they have at that position is going to be good enough to beat Oregon or Ohio State.
Okay. And then Will Howard. So Will Howard is 3rd on your list.
Mm-hmm.
Could Will Howard be number 1 by the end of the year? And what would it take for him to be number 1 by the end of the year? And for us to go back to this list, and in a world where Ohio State has had the Big Ten quarterback of the year for 10 of the past 12 seasons, they did not last year. Kyle McCord was 3rd. By our estimation, which matters more, but also by the voters, can Will Howard be the best guy in the league?
I think he could be. Yeah. The stats will be there, I think, for it. It'll be a question of like how closely people are watching it, because like Will Howard has been very good for Ohio State in his first 3 games. He's making almost all the right decisions, but they're, in terms of like high level throws, they're not asking him to do a whole lot. He's just kind of similar to Dylan Gabriel. He's just like kind of playing point guard, and it's been super effective. Like, I think this is not necessarily part of this conversation, but I was like poking around on some other stuff. Like, I think you can make the case that Ohio State, which has like fully leaned into the RPO world with his offense, might be the best RPO team in the country based off their production through 3 games. And a lot of that is because of how good Will Howard is of operating that system. But he's just like, he's not throwing the ball down the field a ton, and he hasn't run yet either. So I think those things will start to come out. I think they will become an offense that gets a little more vertical. I think he will start to use his legs as Ohio State gets into Big Ten play and the competition ramps up a little bit. But because he hasn't really done that yet is why I have him 3rd. But I like when that happens, and I think it is a when that happens, I think he will be a guy who's really pushing to be number 1 on this list.
Okay. We started here. Let's end here. What was JT Barrett's best trait, do you think?
And
I'm not trying to trick you. I have my answer. I think there's 2 answers, but
I think it's, I don't like, would you say like toughness is one? Like just like being a dude who's going to kind of do whatever it takes to get 3 yards kind of thing?
So I think that would be my second answer. Like toughness of like super powerful lower body. It was like trying to tackle a fullback when he was a quarterback. But I do think, and I think it was in contrast to Braxton, and Braxton's best trait was that Braxton could do things that no human could do. But JT had a great feel for the decision-making in the read game and the run game, right? He almost always made the right decision on whether to keep it and whether to give it. And I don't think Braxton ever felt completely comfortable with that in the same way. I think right with Braxton, maybe they were like predetermined things and it wasn't as much like read the end or read the linebacker and make a decision in the moment, because Braxton had other gifts, but that JT didn't have. But I think JT had that gift. So if we're getting to this, so like, how did it's like, oh, JT Barrett by the end, we're not at the end with Will Howard. Because here's the thing. Will Howard will never get to the point that JT Barrett got to with Ohio State fans, because you're not going to have the chance to get sick of Will Howard, because he's going to be here and he's going to be gone. And you were only sick of JT Barrett at the end. Nobody was sick of JT Barrett in 2014. Were they?
No.
They thought JT Barrett was a hero in 2014. They thought JT Barrett was a winner in 2014. They thought JT Barrett was their guy in 2014. So if we're talking about always making the right decision, but in this offense, that's a run-pass decision. In the previous offense 10 years ago, it was a run or keep. It was a hand or keep decision, but it's all in the run game. but it's still a decision. You're still making the same read. It's just what you do after you keep it. It's still a hand it or keep it decision, is it not? But then there's an extra version of there's an extra part of it that after you make the decision to keep it, now you're throwing it instead of running it. Is it a fair comparison? No.
Yeah, I think it is. And but I guess I would just add on top of that there will be more of Will Howard making the decision between running it himself or handing it to somebody. They haven't done. I think he has 2 design runs so far. But there's a ton more like run pass option in this offense than there was at really any time previously in Ohio State since Urban Meyer took over.
But could we reach the point as we get through this season that when we talk about what Will Howard does best, number 1 is decision making and number 2 is toughness?
Yes, I think so. And I think there's a real skill to like sort of the mechanics of riding out a read, pulling it, throwing it, making sure your feet are all right, like always in the right spot, being deceptive in the way that you do it for defenders. I think Will Howard's very good at that. I always thought JT Barrett was really good at it, but like Will Howard is excellent at it. It's like I call it ball manipulation, but I always hesitate to say it out loud because it sounds a little weird. But I really do think that's a skill for a quarterback, and Will seems to excel at it in a way that like really I think does make this offense go.
Yeah, Will, not to be crude, but would you say you're just good at ball manipulation? So let's arrive. I wish I would have arrived at this. I think it would have kept more people around listening. Did we arrive 80 minutes in at Will Howard is throwing JT, but he's 2014 JT. He's JT before you got sick of him. So he's JT. He's decisive, tough, throwing version of JT Barrett. And JT Barrett, had a bunch of skill guys on offense to help make him look good and help not make him look good, help the team be good. Okay. So you had Michael Thomas and Devin Smith and Ezekiel Elliott. It's like, okay, you have Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Quinshon Judkins and Trayvon Henderson. Okay. And then you had a great defense. And now you have a great defense. And so Will Howard is JT Barrett. He's just a throwing version of that, but the traits are similar and the winning has a chance to be similar. And by the way, when Ohio State now they beat Marcus Mariota in the national championship game. When they played Alabama, Alabama's playing a linebacker quarterback. Was not necessarily, the season was not festooned with awesome chucking it all over the place quarterbacks at every good team. I like this comparison that we have arrived at. Perhaps others have arrived at it previously that I'm unaware of. But if this is what we have arrived at, I like it as an explainer. And B, I think it should make Ohio State fans feel good because that version of quarterback play won a national title for them with everything else that was around it. And that seems quite possible to me again 10 years later.
I think, I think I've landed on too that Will Howard is just like a more accurate version of JT Barrett. Yeah. That I think would get you a really long way. Like JT just like never quite progressed in that area of his game the way you would have liked him to. And I think Will Howard over the course of his career has, like, he's not the most accurate quarterback in the country, but he's fairly accurate. And I think significantly better than he was like 2 years ago when he was playing for Kansas State too. So there's a lot there. Like JT Barrett could also lead a military unit in the war and I think be pretty effective. Like it's just like the way of like his innate leadership qualities.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Will Howard doesn't like do all that, although he seems like a pretty good leader. But like from a football standpoint, like running ability, toughness, decision making, and then like I think a plus as a passer. I think Will Howard is checking a lot of the same boxes as JT.
Yeah, and they're never going to run Will Howard 20 times a game. JT's a better runner than Will Howard. Will Howard's a better thrower than JT Barrett. But I think like they do one thing quite well and the second thing pretty well, right? And that allowed them, it's just that JT, it was run first, throw second. With Will Howard, it's throw first, run second. But they both can do both. Go ahead.
I think Will is a better runner than JT was a passer.
Okay.
Like if you're ranking those four skill sets, I think you might go JT running 1, and maybe you go Will passing 2, Will running 3, JT passing 4.
Okay. Yeah, consistently. I mean, JT certainly in moments. Second half against Penn State, the Michigan State game in 2014, right? Certainly in moments. But yeah, but that can be a winning package when you have the right other stuff around them, which would take us back to if in between, maybe you were never there, but if in between JT Barrett and Will Howard, I felt like there was a time when you needed an NFL quarterback to win a national title. On the two ends of this now, if we weren't in that era in 14 and we're out of that era in 24, then Ohio State's in a really good spot for both.
Yep, I think that's right.
Okay. I like it. Sometimes you just got to talk until you figure out what you think.
And then an hour and 25 minutes into the show, you figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Is everybody already here? Will Howard is throwing JT. Is that what everybody already thinks? And I'm just late to the party.
I don't know if everyone thinks that. Like I've certainly heard some of it. I think people wondering if Will Howard could be like a version of JT that was better as a passer. Yeah, but the thing is, like, he hasn't he hasn't run really all that much yet. So like we haven't. Yeah. It's not like we've seen it in games for people to like, oh yeah, that's what he is. But I think that's coming. I think we'll start to see the legs used more. Just like we saw at times with JT, right? Throwing it. Do you think we could get a game where it's like, oh, Will Howard ran it 16 times for 91 yards against Iowa? Yeah, I think that, like not as a plan always, but as they stopped this, they tried to prevent this, so then we did this, and Will, broke off a 26-yard run, and then Will ran. We called a like kind of a read play where there was a QB keep option on 3rd and 5, and it really worked. And Will got 13 on it, and Iowa wasn't ready for it. And like that becomes a weapon for them because it's not the first thing. Just like a lot of time. I mean, when JT was at his best, it's like, well, JT's throwing is not the first thing because Ezekiel Elliott's the first thing. And JT running's the second thing. But then if JT throwing's the third thing, it's like, well, that's your third thing. That's pretty good. And if Will running is your third thing, that's pretty good. I think that could be very effective. Yeah. And he said on Tuesday, like he is looking forward to those opportunities. He said two things. One, like he said he doesn't feel like teams are defending Ohio State right now. Like they're worried about him running. Okay. And like I'm putting words in his mouth, but he kind of said like we're going to get to the point where they're going to need to be worried about me running because I'm like looking forward to starting to take advantage of some of those opportunities. Okay, so that's coming. Yeah. Okay. That's it for this Kings of Columbus. We'll catch a bunch of you on KOTN on Wednesday, where we will talk about Alabama, Georgia. Well, we will talk about the UNLV quarterback leaving the team over an NIL disagreement, where Bill and I will break down a couple of these new West Coast Big Ten games. We have UCLA, Oregon this week. We have Washington going to Rutgers. We have Wisconsin going to USC. It's kind of like the new world of the Big Ten is officially here this weekend. And again, if you've never tried KOTN, I think you'd at least, if you jump in and try it once or twice, who knows? Then you can at least decide that you don't like it, which is also progress. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good. For now, he is Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of Columbus.